We back. What's going on, folks? This is the Smoke Breakdown Podcast. I am your host, Andy Franick. And here we are. Deep in the holiday season. Hope you're all enjoying it. Just had an office holiday party. Started buying some Christmas gifts. So yeah, Yuletide is upon us. So I'm just here wishing you and yours a happy holidays. We've got a great pod for y'all today, including a return of perhaps my favorite segment. But first, I was able to see Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse last night. I went out to the theaters, checked it out, and yeah, it was okay. Best part about it, to be sure, was the animation, both the style of the animation and just the overall quality of it. Top notch. Doesn't get much better than that. But the story in and of itself was kind of basic, I'll be honest. It was just kind of basic. And I think, I was seeing all like the Rotten Tomatoes stuff that it was at like 100%. And just, I think I went in with really, really high expectations, expecting like some sort of mind-blowing plot. But it is what it is. So even though I was like maybe a little bit underwhelmed, I still had a great time. And yeah, but the worst part about it, I'll be honest, is that my theory that I espoused in the last podcast was very much incorrect. So just to go back, just to recap, my theory was that because this movie was about like multiple dimensions and parallel universes, there was a possibility that the Tom Holland Spider-Man would show up in the movie, but that was definitely not the case. And not even that, but the MCU in general was never mentioned in any way, shape, or form. So I was way off base there. So that was a little bit deflating, but you know what? Well, let's see what happens in Captain Marvel and in Endgame as well, just to see if I can get back on track with some of my other theories. But yeah, for now, let's get into it. We got the breakdown coming later, of course, but first, the return of one of my favorite segments. Definitely my favorite segment, the Dragon Ball Comp of the Week. This week, we're comparing Kanye West to Mr. Hercule Satan.
All right, I should have known. Nobody wants to mess with the mighty Mr. Satan. No siree, I am the king.
When we're first introduced to Mr. Satan in Dragon Ball Z, he is, within his own context, a great martial arts fighter. He was just coming off of winning the 24th World Martial Arts Tournament, so without any knowledge of what was going on in the wild or on other planets, it would be reasonable to assume that he was the world's strongest fighter. And that's exactly what both he and essentially the rest of the planet does. And man, does it ever go to his head. Now, rich beyond belief and with his arrogance at an all-time high, Hercule decides to enter the Cell Games and insert himself into a world that is not his own. There, he's met with a group of martial artists that are on an entirely different level, one that he could barely even understand, let alone approach or achieve. With his ego at an 11 out of 10, he at first defaults to delusion over acceptance, choosing to believe that Cell, Goku, and the others were using cheap light tricks to accomplish their key attacks. And on the other hand, all the other participants in the Cell game see Hercule for who he is, an extremely weak and insignificant factor, relatively speaking, who's at best just going to get in the way. So even though Mr. Satan continues to talk a big game, they all just kind of ignore him, knowing that he's all bark and no bite. When it comes to egomania, Kanye West may be Mr. Satan's only equal. After all the hits, the accolades, the awards, all the sales, all of the love and the stands, me included, admittedly, Kanye let it all go to his head. And with that bulletproof arrogance and a warped, overinflated self-conception, he decided to step into worlds that weren't his own. Whether it was celebrity or politics, it was clear to some that his bark severely dwarfed his bite. I personally watched in dismay as time after time, Kanye decided to embrace delusion over acceptance, eventually culminating in that strange release of The Life of Pablo. Remember how it was like released and then re-released, like the track list changed, songs were re-edited and re-released. It was like kind of a mess. All of this was going on and it was really concerning. But to me, who at the time was still a strong believer in Kanye. It was the music itself that ended up being so discouraging. Thematically, it was dark and hedonistic as well, which on its own isn't particularly a bad thing, but what I sensed at the core of the project was delusion, and it was deep and it was unbridled. And from that moment, I was done. I was off the Kanye bandwagon. And so fast forward to this week, and all I'm hearing are these stories about Kanye tweeting through some shit, and I'm just here like, I don't give a shit. I do not care about anything that man has to say, and I don't care what he's going through. He certainly needs help, but it's looking like he's never going to actually realize that for himself. And so, much like Cell did to Mr. Satan, I'm just going to ignore him and tune him out. If the truth didn't sink in for him after, he was so grotesquely exploited by Trump and the GOP in such a horrific and embarrassing fashion, wearing the MAGA hat, saying that shit like slavery was a choice. Remember that shit? If after all of that, it still hasn't sunk in for him, like what are we really doing here, At least Hercule found a modicum of humility following the Cell games and was able to admit to himself that he wasn't what he thought he was. But until Kanye has that moment, in my mind, he'll remain a weak and insignificant factor who at best just gets in the way.
Put your hands together for Mr.
We'll be right back with the breakdown. But first, I want to let you know about our website, afrodismal.com. Go check it out. We got our blog up there. Obviously, all our past episodes of the podcast. We got some music as well, and we got some videos. Feel free to check it out and follow us on social media at afrodismal on Twitter. And yeah, let us know what you think using the hashtag SBDpod.
Now it's time for a breakdown.
So earlier this week, the Ontario Human Rights Commission released a report on racial profiling by the Toronto Police. And one of the points that immediately struck me, and what I think is a good node to center our conversation around, was a point that was made by a U of T professor of sociology, and that is that it's difficult to examine race and policing in Canada and Toronto because we don't have access to good data that's broken down by race. I think a great place to start is with the book Policing Black Lives by Robin Maynard, which really tackles racism in Canada on a macro scale very comprehensively and in a way that I've never really seen before. In it, Maynard really drives home the point that Canada as a country likes to hide behind its self-conception as a multicultural paradise in order to shield itself from the reality that racism pervades its history and persists to this day. It's actually kind of like Mr. Satan and Kanye from our last segment, in a sense that the conception of delusion is coming into play here. And what happens is, if you believe that as a country, you're defined by how you celebrate your multiculturalism, defined by the notion that you're a salad bowl and not a melting pot, it then becomes really easy to convince yourself that you've progressed beyond race and therefore don't need to gather race-based stats. It's really the institutional version of I don't see color. And the kicker is that without those race-based stats, you never actually get exposed to the reality of the situation. As a country, you get to maintain a blissful ignorance that upholds some sort of national pride, I guess. But luckily, the OHRC came through with the facts, with an analysis of 7 years' worth of police data pertaining to carding practices, use of force, various arrest statistics, as well as, personal anecdotes. The report was equipped with some ironclad evidence. They found that Toronto's black population is grossly overrepresented in the SIU investigations. In fact, the more severe the incident, the more likely black folks are to be involved. Case in point, black folks are 20 times more likely than white folks to be shot and killed by the police, despite the fact that white folks are almost twice as likely to be carrying a weapon in those instances. The police on their end are being their salty selves, vaguely suggesting that the report is biased, saying that, quote, some may raise questions, unquote, about it. What those questions actually are, nobody knows. Nevertheless, they say they're committed to doing better, but of course they're going to say that. Time will tell if they actually mean it. But on the grander scale, Pair this report with the Stats Canada findings regarding hate crimes that was released a couple weeks back, and one gets a very different view of Canada as a whole, one that doesn't quite coincide with the salad bowl image we like to hold on to and that we like to project. Turns out that here in Canada, we have a lot of work to do. So let's get to it. Allons-y! Anyways, that's our podcast for this week. Hope you all enjoyed it. Just over a week left until Christmas, so happy holidays to everyone. Again, it's all about progress, not perfection. Any Frantic out.